The CEO didn't even look up. He glanced at the resume once, then slid it back across the desk as if it carried no weight. "Your qualifications are impressive," he said calmly, "but this role requires a certain background." Daniel Cole understood immediately. Behind the glass walls of the executive office, the company pulsed with innovation. Engineers walking fast, screens glowing with ideas that could change the world. But Daniel stood still, not because he lacked intelligence, not because he lacked skill, but because his name didn't belong to the world behind those walls. And his father cleaned those walls every night. Daniel's father, Samuel Cole, had been a janitor in that very building for 17 years. 17 years of emptying trash bins no one noticed. 17 years of polishing floors executives never thanked him for. 17 years of quiet dignity. Every night, Samuel came home tired, but never bitter. And he told his son the same thing, over and over. They can take everything from you, except what you put in your mind. Daniel listened. While other kids played video games, Daniel dismantled broken radios. While others slept, he sketched ideas under a flickering kitchen light. Old machines became teachers. Failure became fuel. He didn't grow up surrounded by money. He grew up surrounded by possibility. That morning, Daniel walked into the building with hope, not entitlement, not arrogance, just hope. His portfolio held years of work, prototypes, designs, solutions to problems companies hadn't even realized were costing them millions. Energy-saving systems, compact mechanical innovations, simple ideas with powerful impact. But none of that mattered now. The CEO, Richard Halden, stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "We're looking for candidates who fit our culture," he said politely. Daniel nodded. He shook the CEO's hand and walked out, his dignity intact, his opportunity denied. In the elevator, Daniel stared at his reflection, not angry, not broken, just awake. Awake to the truth that talent doesn't always get invited into the room. Awake to the reality that brilliance often lives where no one is looking. When the elevator doors opened, Daniel stepped out and nearly bumped into his father pushing a cleaning cart. Samuel smiled warmly. "How'd it go?" he asked. Daniel paused, then smiled back. "They weren't ready," he said. That night, while the city slept, Daniel returned to his small workshop. No investors, no job title, no applause, just tools, blueprints, and determination. What the CEO didn't know, what no one in that building could imagine, was that the ideas Daniel carried wouldn't stay hidden forever. And when the world finally saw them, a man who judged by background would regret the day he dismissed a janitor's son. Daniel Cole didn't complain. He didn't post about rejection. He didn't blame the CEO. He didn't argue with fate. He went back to work. Every morning before sunrise, Daniel returned to his workshop, a converted garage with poor lighting, secondhand tools, and walls covered in sketches. This was where ideas lived, not the kind that impressed people at meetings, the kind that solved problems quietly. Daniel focused on one flaw he had noticed during his interview. The company's flagship system wasted energy in ways no one seemed to question, not because it was unsolvable, but because fixing it wouldn't look impressive on a presentation slide. So Daniel worked. Days turned into weeks. His father watched silently as Daniel tested, failed, adjusted, and tried again. Samuel never interrupted, never rushed him, never doubted him. One night, as Daniel sat staring at another failed prototype, his father placed a cup of tea beside him. "You're getting closer," Samuel said. Daniel sighed. "Closer doesn't pay bills." Samuel smiled gently. "Neither does quitting," he replied. The breakthrough came quietly. No music, no applause, just a moment where Daniel realized the system didn't need to be bigger. It needed to be simpler. He redesigned the core mechanism, reducing waste by nearly 40%. 40%. The kind of improvement companies spent millions chasing and never found. Daniel stared at the numbers, unsure whether to celebrate or stay cautious. Because one thing was clear, if he was right, someone would eventually notice. But the world didn't change overnight. Emails went unanswered. Cold calls ended quickly. Doors remained closed. To most people, Daniel was still just a janitor's son with ideas, until one small opportunity slipped through a crack. A mid-sized manufacturing firm agreed to review his prototype, not out of belief, but curiosity. Their engineers expected flaws. They found none. The room went silent as the efficiency results appeared on the screen. One engineer leaned back and whispered, "Who designed this?" Daniel raised his hand. Within weeks, word spread. Not loudly, not publicly, but among people who understood what they were seeing. Daniel's design began circulating in closed meetings, in private conversations, in spaces where decisions were made. And without realizing it, the same company that had rejected him began discussing a mysterious innovation that threatened to outperform their own flagship system. The CEO, Richard Halden, frowned as he studied the data. "This isn't ours," he said. "No," someone replied, "but it's better." Richard didn't know the name yet. He didn't know the face. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet discomfort began to grow, because for the first time in years, something he didn't control was changing the game. If this story is speaking to something inside you, this channel was created for you. On Echoes of Wisdom, every story is told to leave you wiser than before. Subscribe and walk this journey with us. The room felt different. Executives leaned forward. Screens glowed brighter. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The data in front of them didn't just suggest improvement. It proved it. 40% efficiency, lower cost, fewer failures. Richard Halden stared at the projection, his jaw tightening. "Who owns this design?" he asked. There was a pause. A junior analyst cleared her throat. "It was submitted independently," she said, "by a man named Daniel Cole." The name landed softly. Too softly. Richard frowned, searching his memory. "Where is he from?" he asked. Another pause. "He doesn't have a corporate background," the analyst continued carefully. "His father works in maintenance." The room went quiet, not uncomfortable, unsettled. Richard leaned back in his chair. Something stirred, not anger, not disbelief, but recognition. A face flashed through his mind. A young man. A resume slid back across the desk. A polite refusal. The realization came slowly, painfully. The invention he now admired had once sat quietly in front of him, and he had dismissed it. That afternoon, Richard walked through the building without announcing himself. For the first time in years, he noticed things he had never seen. The janitor polishing a railing with care. The tired eyes behind quiet dedication. The invisible people who kept the place alive. On the ground floor, he stopped. Samuel Cole was mopping the hallway. Richard watched him for a moment before speaking. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. Samuel looked up, surprised. 17 years, sir." Richard nodded slowly. "And your son," he asked, "is he an engineer?" Samuel paused, then smiled. "He's a problem solver," he said. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. The invention, the data, the interview. He replayed his words. This role requires a certain background. For the first time, the sentence didn't sound professional. It sounded small. The next morning, Richard asked his assistant to arrange a meeting, not with the board, not with investors, with Daniel Cole. But something had changed. This time, Richard wasn't sure if Daniel would accept, because recognition had arrived late, and regret had arrived right on time. Daniel Cole almost declined the invitation, not out of pride, not out of revenge, but because something in him had changed. He had learned that validation was fragile, and self-belief was not. Still, after a quiet conversation with his father, Daniel agreed. "Go," Samuel said gently, "not to prove anything, but to understand who you're becoming." The executive office looked exactly the same glass walls, the same skyline, the same polished desk. But Daniel was different, and so was the man waiting for him. Richard Halden stood as Daniel entered, not out of habit, but respect. "Thank you for coming," he said. Daniel nodded. They sat. No assistants, no distractions, just two men and the truth between them. Richard spoke first. "I made a mistake," he said plainly. "No excuses. No softened language. I saw your resume. I saw your potential. And I still chose comfort over courage." Daniel listened, not with anger, but with clarity. Richard continued, "I judge you by where you came from, not by what you built. And the world nearly lost something valuable because of it." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. Daniel finally spoke. "I didn't need the job," he said calmly. "I needed the chance." Richard nodded. "I know that now." He slid a contract across the table. A generous offer, a leadership role, resources Daniel had never had access to. "Work with us," Richard said. "Let's build this together." Daniel looked at the paper. Then he looked up and shook his head. "I'll work with you," Daniel said, "but not for you." Richard blinked. Daniel continued, "I want my invention to stay accessible. I want young minds from overlooked places to be hired, trained, and heard. And I want my father's role and others like his to be treated with dignity." Richard leaned back, absorbing every word. This was a negotiation. It was principle. After a long moment, Richard stood. He extended his hand. "You're not just an inventor," he said. "You're a leader." Daniel shook his hand, not triumphantly, not bitterly, but firmly. That afternoon, Richard made changes. Hiring policies shifted. Internship doors opened. Voices once ignored were finally invited into the room, not because it looked good, but because it was right. As Daniel walked out of the building, he passed his father in the hallway. Samuel smiled. Daniel smiled back. This time, the doors didn't need cleaning. They were opening. Change didn't come quietly. When the new policies were announced, not everyone applauded. Some executives smiled politely, then complained behind closed doors. "This isn't how we've always done things. We're lowering standards. Talent should already be polished." Richard Halden heard it all, and for the first time in his career, he didn't hide behind procedure. He listened, then he spoke. "We didn't lower standards," he said calmly. "We widened our vision." Daniel Cole didn't step into his new role with ego. He arrived early. He stayed late. He listened more than he spoke. He spent time with engineers and with custodial staff, with interns and with security guards, because he understood something most leaders never learned. Innovation doesn't live in titles. It lives in people. One afternoon, Daniel noticed a young technician hesitating near a whiteboard. "You have something to say," Daniel said gently. The technician shook his head. "No one listens to me." Daniel handed him the marker. "Start talking," he said. The idea that followed saved the company millions. The room went silent. Again, not everyone was comfortable with Daniel's influence. A senior manager pulled Richard aside. "You're letting one man change the culture too fast," he warned. Richard paused, then replied quietly, "No, I'm letting the culture catch up to reality." That evening, Daniel sat with his father at the kitchen table. Samuel listened as Daniel spoke about resistance, doubt, and pressure. Samuel nodded slowly. "Growth always makes noise," he said, "but meaning makes it worth it." Daniel smiled. He finally understood what his father had given him all along. Not connections, not money, perspective. Meanwhile, competitors began to notice. The company's products were improving faster than expected. Talent retention rose. Innovation accelerated. Whispers spread. Something had changed. And it wasn't just technology. It was mindset. But Daniel knew something was coming. Real transformation always attracts a test. And soon, that test would force everyone involved to choose. Comfort or character. Daniel Cole stood in the glass-walled boardroom, the hum of the city beneath him. On the table lay two proposals. One promised instant profit, a massive contract that would skyrocket revenue, stock value, and prestige. But it required cutting corners, ignoring safety standards, and sidelining the very interns and junior engineers Daniel had fought to empower. The other was smaller, slower, harder, but ethical. It upheld every principle he had fought for. fair treatment, transparency, and accessibility. It would take patience, effort, and courage, but it would honor the people who had trusted him. The room was silent. Every executive waiting for Daniel's decision. He could feel the weight of expectations. The board's eyes were on him. Richard Halden's face was calm, but measured. This was the moment that defined him. Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered the janitor's cart he had passed so many times. His father's gentle voice reminding him that what you put in your mind is your real wealth. The young technician whose ideas saved the company. The small children he imagined one day working in this very building, needing someone to believe in them. Profit gleamed like a polished coin, but principle felt like sunlight. He opened his eyes. "We'll take the slower path," he said firmly. "The path that honors everyone in this room, not just the bottom line." A murmur spread through the boardroom. Some executives frowned. Some whispered. Some nodded slowly. Richard Halden leaned back, a smile forming, not of relief but of pride. "You're building more than a company," he said softly. "You're building a legacy." Daniel exhaled. He knew there would be challenges. There would be doubters, setbacks, and sacrifices. But for the first time in his life, he felt true alignment. Success measured not in money. Influence measured not in power. And leadership measured not in control, but in integrity. That evening, as Daniel walked home past the streets his father had once swept, he felt something new. Not wealth, not recognition, but the quiet confidence of a man who had chosen wisely. And somewhere deep down he knew the real victories were the ones no one could buy. The city skyline sparkled beneath Daniel Cole's window. It was the same view he had seen as a janitor's son. But now he saw it differently, not as a symbol of power, not as a measure of wealth, but as a tapestry of lives, people's struggles, dreams, and potential. Daniel walked through the office the next morning. He stopped to speak with interns, custodians, engineers, and assistants. He didn't judge titles. He didn't weigh backgrounds. He listened. He learned. He encouraged. Every idea, no matter how small, received attention. Every voice, no matter how quiet, earned respect. The change was slow, not flashy, not viral, but real. At the orphanage he had supported quietly, children drew pictures of robots and inventions. At the small workshops he had funded, young engineers tested prototypes. And in the city, whispers spread of a leader who valued character over credentials. Richard Halden watched Daniel's influence grow. The same man who had once dismissed him now witnessed something far greater than profit. A culture had shifted, and it started with one decision to honor principle over wealth. Daniel sat at his father's kitchen table that evening. Samuel poured tea, smiled, and said, "You didn't just invent machines. You're building people. That's your greatest creation." Daniel nodded quietly, and for the first time, he understood completely. Success isn't counted in money, patents, or titles. It's measured in the lives you lift, the opportunities you create, the integrity you keep when no one is watching. And then Daniel smiled, because he knew one truth above all. A man can be rich in every way, but if he cannot see the value in others, he has nothing at all. The camera pans out. Daniel standing at the window. City lights below him, a soft evening glow illuminating his thoughtful face. The story isn't over. It's only just beginning. Stories end, but wisdom stays. If you believe stories can change the way we see life, welcome to Echoes of Wisdom. Subscribe, and let every story leave you better than it found you.